All right. So joining us today is Chris Finn from Par for Success. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Thomas. Excited to be here.
So I'm sure most everybody listening has come across your work somewhere, whether that was an article you wrote or a podcast you've been on or some of the research you've done. But for those who haven't, can you please introduce yourself and tell us why you got into golf performance?
Yeah, for sure. So I started, actually my origin, I guess, was I was a strength and conditioning coach. That's how I kind of paid my way through physical therapy school. I did, any of your other trainers out there, I feel you with the 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and then go, and then I went to class and then you'd come back and you'd work, the 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. and then get up and do it all over again. So that was kind of where I came from, was, just kind of the big box world. And then I went to the physical therapy and I was in the PT mill where you'd see 25 people a day and, hopefully you helped one of them. Right. And so really out of college, I went to a local university hospital here in North Carolina and was seeing 20 something people a day. And I was like, all right, very quickly, let's just put it this way. I'm in the ACC region of Duke, Carolina State. It's apparently not looked well upon, Thomas, if you refer a patient from one of those universities to another one. I didn't understand that being from up north. And long story short, I was written up and decided I needed to go do my own thing. So that's where really when I said, I looked at it, I had gotten into golf. I was addicted to it. I got certified, in TBI and that sort of stuff back in the, right around probably 2009, 2010. And I just kind of went out and started trying to do my own thing and really Par for Success, the origin of it really, and it continues today, of really I'd say like the heartbeat of what we do and all of the research. The reason we do it is I think I'm a skeptic at heart. And then I was learning about all golf fitness. Like, this is a bunch of baloney. There's no way any of this works. And my mother, I drive her nuts saying, well, show me why, prove it to me. Right. So, I'd go to these conferences. Well, prove it. How do you know that? And then what's your sample size? What's your, and the answers I were getting were definitely suboptimal for my skepticism, my skeptic, just personality. And so I went out and I said, well, you know what? I'm not going to be a good employee. So if I'm going to do something, I might as well try to make something work. And so the reason we actually started recording is because I didn't think it was going to work. That's the reason we started testing people, is because I was like, well, if I'm going to ask people for money, I want to make sure I can help them. And, fast forward to today and, we've tested 5,000-6,000 golfers, and it has all stemmed from this kind of curiosity and skepticism of, well, that's cool that you said that worked. How do I know that's going to work for this other person? And as I got deeper and deeper into it, we'll obviously dive into some of the stuff we've worked on and share that with everybody. But it really came from, I'd have like a 55, 60-year-old guy come up and be like, hey, we test him. And oh, you're swinging 95 miles an hour. And he'd be like, cool. Is that good? And I'd be like, I don't know. Let me see what I can pull out of my rear end. I don't know. Yeah, sure. That's good. Or wait, I want you to buy sessions with me. No, that's terrible. We need to get you better. Right. And so I was totally just BSing my way through it in the beginning, but it was kind of throw a lot of stuff at the wall. Let's track it. Let's see what works. And then we continue that today. Every new team member we bring in, the first thing I always say to them is, there's only one. I'm a pretty laid back dude. The only thing that really will ever get me mad is if you had a better way to do it and you didn't tell us, and so we could test it. I never want to hear, our philosophy is we never want to hear, the reason, why do you do it this way? Oh, it's just because the way we've always done it. Like, that's not acceptable. Like, there has to be a reason why. And that's kind of the genesis of where we came from. And, we'll keep doing that until we die.
Yeah. And I want to get into some of your research now. And I want to begin with the 6-week eccentric flywheel study you did. Before you give us the results, though, can you explain what a flywheel is, what your goal with the study was, and how you designed the study?
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorites. And it came from, we had done prior to this, a 2-year study, just collecting tons of data and looking at different strength training protocols on adults and kids. The two in particular that we ended up really looking at were what we would call traditional training, where, anyone who's weightlifted, you do your 3 sets of 10, let's say at 100 pounds, then you drop it to 3 sets of 8, but maybe you go up to 110 pounds and then 3 sets of 6 and maybe go to 120, right? So you get more weight as the volume goes down. So that was kind of what we'll call traditional. And then we looked at triphasic training, which was where you would take, a period of time, 4 or 6 weeks, you can do whatever phase you want. But we would look at, hey, what if we just train the lowering part of the squat, or the eccentric, thinking of golf, your backswing could be called kind of an eccentric stretching, for all of you trainers out there. And I know that some stuff shortens, but we're just being general here. So I think of kind of that as like, the eccentric or the stretching of the tissue while we're putting load on it. And then there's the pause before you'd come up from the squat, right? So it's the isometric. And then when you explode up, that's the concentric. So if we think of those three phases of movement, we looked at kind of training each of those with a focus and kind of continuous phases versus traditional. And what we found was that particularly for the older golfer, 40 plus, that triphasic training was like bounds and ways more effective than traditional training. It actually was flipped the opposite for juniors. So from that was the genesis of this flywheel study was, well, shoot, if we know that eccentric and kind of like triphasic phasic training really is beneficial for golfers and to the tune of 60% better return on club head speed compared to traditional. Well, what happens if we just look at eccentric rotate, overload, and how could we do that in a rotational manner, right? Because there's, at that time, I think this was probably 2017, 18, or maybe it was 18, 19. There's Instagram's running wild of people throwing med balls and doing all this rotary stuff and, the sling thing that's and it's like, okay, like it works on Instagram, quote, right? But does it actually work? Like, let's test it. So that's where we, what a flywheel is. It actually was invented like in the 50s for astronauts, so they could get load on their tissue without having gravity. So if you think about it, like if basically the harder you pull the strap, it kind of wraps around this wheel. The harder you pull it, it then when it gets to the end of the end of the line, it basically then pulls back harder. So the harder you pull, the harder it pulls you back, and the eccentric overload occurs from you having to resist that pull back. So if we think of if you're holding everyone's done a cable rotation, right? Where you hold the cable out in front of you and you rotate to your left, then come back to the middle, and then you go back to the left. So with a flywheel, you'd pull hard to the left, and then you'd have to resist it as it pulls. The wheel's going to pull you back harder to the right, and you got to kind of slow it down to then move it back to the direction. So this study, what we looked at was we had a couple groups. We had one group who was using the flywheel rotationally, compared to this other group that was using kind of your traditional like cable machines and medicine balls, bands. And then you had another group that was doing their flywheel can be used rotationally. It also can be used to resist like squats and deadlifts type movements, so up and downs. So we had another group that used it for those, and instead of using barbells for squatting or hinging. So we kind of had a control group, and then a group we wanted to see this flywheel. At that point we knew it worked with barbells, traditional movements, eccentric work. Did it work? Was there a difference is the flywheel better than barbells, for squatting and hinging, or is it better than bands and the other traditional rotational stuff that to that point we'd been using and, thought we were getting success with? So that was kind of the genesis of it. And that's how we broke up the different groups to kind of see what shook out.
And then, so what happened? So I'll just reiterate here. So there's three groups. The big difference between the three groups is, first of all, the control group didn't do any flywheel training. The second group used the flywheel for the rotational exercise. And then the third group used the flywheel for their big lifts, the chest press, the squats, deadlift, and bent over row. Okay. So
exactly. So it was the same program. The only thing that we interchanged in and out was the implement of the flywheel or not.
Right. And then, what did you find?
Yeah, so it was really cool, Thomas, because I think a lot of times when you think of research, you think of like, I want, as the researcher, you're like, I want to find something that's statistically significant. Like it's like nerd cool, right? But I think, what sometimes gets lost is that, and what I've kind of learned and we've learned as a team is sometimes having nothing be different is actually a cooler finding. And particularly when it comes to application, in the field, to golfers, to clinicians, those sorts of things. So basically what we found was with the K-box group, so that was the group that was doing the squats, the deadlifts, the presses with the flywheel instead of the barbell, there statistically was no difference compared to the group that was just using barbells. So we looked at the control group who was just using barbells, it was like 1.4% average club head speed change. The group who was using the flywheels was like 1.6%. So raw, it was a little bit higher, but if you go looking at it statistically, there really wasn't a big difference. So the cool thing of that, or the takeaway from that, is basically that if you're on the road, a flywheel can be a lot more portable. We use it with our tour players. A barbell doesn't fit very good in a really small compact car, particularly for those developmental players who are driving all over the country. A flywheel can travel. So you can actually get the same results with a flywheel with those big three as you can with the, with the barbell. So that was a pretty cool finding, obviously in relation to club head speed change. The really cool one though was when we looked at the actual group that was using the K-pulley to do the rotational training, and when they did that, then we saw basically a 2x return on club head speed, so almost 3% change. If we looked at the raw numbers, it went from like 1.2 miles an hour average change in the control, and I think the K box group was like 1.3, so pretty much like just over a mile an hour. It went to over 2.5 miles an hour, like 2.6. So we're talking like almost 3 miles an hour gain versus 1 mile an hour gain in the group that was using rotational eccentric overload training, which was like, holy, like that's like almost 3 miles an hour is like, that's like 10 yards, depending on, if you hit it well and whatnot. So that's extremely significant. And it made sense building off of the findings that we had done in those first couple of years, where the eccentric strength training, and the fact that you can really train the, anterior chain, posterior chain, squatting, deadlifting pretty well with barbells. So it makes sense that there wouldn't be that big of a difference, but it's really hard to get an eccentric overload with a cable, right? unless you have a buddy who helps you walk it out, and then you got to like slowly, bring it in. So it made a lot of sense, like scientifically and physiologically. And it was such a cool takeaway for us that, now we're building a new facility. We're putting 2-3 of these, the eccentric K-pulleys in there, just because they're so useful. And as a gym owner, like everybody wants to use it, all of our clients, and right now we only have one. And it's like, it becomes like a blockage, right? Because everyone's trying to get the cool toy. So it really is, it is something that we have found that was significantly helpful to golfers in gaining club head speed and doing it safely.
Yeah. And when I read the study, I was really happy to see the results because, as I was telling you earlier, I have a lot of people, they reach out to me, they have pain near their rib cage, they have pain kind of on the side or front of their abdomen, or on their side above their pelvis, kind of into the low back. And when we do an assessment, and this is on the trail side, and we do an assessment, we oftentimes find that they have a muscle strain in their external oblique.
Yep.
And for the listeners, eccentric contractions are a standard protocol for muscle strains. And rotational exercises are a great way to target the external oblique. So if somebody has a muscle strain in their external oblique, with standard procedure to do eccentric rotations to strengthen that muscle and to help it recover, and then also to build injury resilience. Because that injury, I see it so often, eccentric trunk rotations have become a standard exercise in pretty much all of my clients' programs to build injury resilience. But now you've shown that by doing this exercise, not only are you making your obliques more robust, you're also increasing club head speed, which is awesome, right? So that means this exercise is awesome. And, everybody should be doing probably some variation of it. And I want to talk about how to program this stuff now a little bit. And I do have a couple questions about just how you set the study up.
Yeah.
What was the tempo you used for the exercises?
Yeah, so it was really, from the exercises, we went with kind of a self-limiting, for the eccentric in the group that was using barbells, generally we did about a 5-second descent. So we tell people 7, knowing that they'll actually do like 5, right? So this is the art of program design. Is you tell them 7, you're gonna get somewhere between 3 to 5. So those were the tempos. You're laughing, so I know you know what I'm talking about, right? Particularly that first one, that's like a solid 5 seconds. By the time you get to like rep 5, it's like, dude, did you even like? That looked like 1-to-1. It looked like you came up faster than or slower than when you went down. So that we always try to shoot kind of for that 5-second is kind of what we have found was successful for us. In the early days, we tell people 3 to 5, and then we realized what they would actually do. So now we say 5 to 7-second descents. In terms of on the flywheels, we would basically just tell them. So we think of rotationally, like if they had both arms straight out, like on a straight bar, right? And so let's say the pulley is kind of to your right, so you're rotating left to pull it out. We'd say you basically, rip it as hard as you can, get it going. And then what we want you to do is stop so that right arm, which is so the pulley's to your right. We want to stop when that right arm is straight out from your hip, kind of straight out in front of you. So basically trying to force them to decel as quickly as possible off of that rebound off the pull. So that's where we would find that when we, using the K meter, on the eccentric K pulley, there's a meter, so you can actually measure what your concentric, like how many watts of power you output going, when you pull it out, and then how much do you exert when you're slowing it down. And we basically you'd have it, the iPad there, and you're trying to get the, explain to the client, you want that eccentric number to be as high as possible relative to the concentric or the contraction pulling out. So those were kind of the tempos that we use in those.
What was the tempo for the pneumatic cable machine when you weren't doing that eccentric flywheel rotation?
Yep. So we just coached it, just rotate. So it's basically kind of 1-to-1, as most people would do it, right? So we kept it as we had been coaching it prior in all the years, and as we would see in kind of the normal, I guess the mainstream, golf fitness realm.
And then in the study, there's 3 different types of resistance. We have weight, which is provided by the barbells. We have air pressure from the pneumatic cable machine, and we have inertia from the flywheel. So because there's 3 different types of resistance, how did you measure intensity and keep it consistent across the different types of resistance?
Yeah, great question. So throughout the program, we would basically we coach a lot of our athletes. We put in, particularly like barbell, like we measure their maxes, and so you can put in their percentages. But what we always tell people, because obviously that you've been training long enough, 80% of your max isn't always 80% of your max, depending if you slept 2 hours last night and you just got off a red eye, right? So it's kind of, we always would correlate that to kind of an RPE, or like, hey, I want you to feel like you got 2 good ones left in the tank, or feel like that was your last good technical rep. So it was on the weights, it was percentage based, and both groups were coached because we didn't have necessarily a weight, because the flywheel is particularly is more as well as the pneumatic device. They're going to be a little bit more RPE, or how hard you pull out is going to impact a little more self-limiting. That's where we would say, hey, we want to make sure that when you get to the last rep that you have, 2 left, or, and we would coach the RPEs equivalent across the 3 groups. Obviously with the barbells, it was easier because we knew what the weight should be, but it would also allow us to adjust kind of on the fly if somebody just wasn't feeling it that day, or, they played golf 6 days in a row and they were exhausted. So
for the people listening, RPE is ratings of perceived exertion. So basically you guys are going like a 7 or 8 out of 10 in terms of effort with that.
Yeah. So if we were like, an 8 out of 10 is like, hey, go like you got like 1 to 2 reps left in the tank that are good quality. And typically that's usually the most that we'll do. Other than test week, we'll do 3 rep maxes. Or, and if they're like, I might've had 1 more, we're like, okay, we're good. Like, we're not testing for the Olympic trials here. It's close enough. That gives us a good general enough idea of where you're at.
So then for the people listening, if they don't have access to a flywheel, or they're not looking to maybe invest in one, how would you, and they're going to be doing this exercise, the rotational exercise with a cable machine in the gym or with bands, how would you recommend they perform that exercise to try to get as close as they can to that eccentric stimulus that the flywheel is giving?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think the first thing is that if you're listening, I hope you're friendly and that you can make friends at the gym, because this is usually the best recommendation. If you don't have any friends at the gym, it's a great way to meet people. It's generally the idea of the eccentric, right? When you pull out, is that it's going to pull back harder. So, if you think of, if you got 2 hands on let's say you're using one of the handles on the cable machine, and let's say you can only pull out, 50 pounds, right? If you get you've made your new friend, you guys are bros now, and you put it at 70 pounds, say, hey, can you help me just get it out to the end range of the rotation? And then, then they basically would let go. Then you have to slowly try to control that back to the start. And then you can have them do that again. Now, if you can't make friends or there's no one else in the gym, the other option would be you kind of grab it, hold it in close to your chest, walk it out, and then try to kind of, get to, just parallel and then rotate it back in. But making friends is always, it's mutually beneficial, helps your club head speed. And now you got a buddy to spot you at the gym.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I never really thought about that so much. Is you could have, if your hands are by your chest, the moment arm is a lot shorter. So it's going to take a lot less effort on your part to keep that sort of stabilized and to keep that sort of in an anti-rotational position. So you could load that up, have your hands by your chest, and then extend your arms, increase that moment arm, and then resist it coming back. So that's a good idea.
Yeah, because I think that's when people think about rotational work, they don't a lot of times don't think about what's the weak point in the system. And for most people, the weak point in the system is the shoulder. Obviously it's the most mobile joint up there. So yeah, by shortening that lever arm, having it closer to your chest does, inherently allow you to put more load out there, and then you can kind of preset it and then slowly try to, unload it, eccentrically.
So then when I program this stuff, usually we're looking at 2 to 4 sets, 6 to 12 reps. Obviously, as the reps go down, the intensity goes up, the RP goes up.
Mm-hmm.
We're usually aiming for the 3 to 4 second contraction. That's because we're thinking of it in terms of the muscle strain side of things. Rest interval, 30 seconds, all the way up to 2 to 3 minutes, depending on, how much the intensity, what the load is, what the resistance is. And then whether or not we're trying to stimulate some sort of hypertrophy as well in the muscle. And we're doing that 2 to 4 days a week. Is that similar to what you guys are doing as well?
So everything that you said sounds pretty close to what we do. The only thing we do, we will periodize it throughout the year. So we will do some, like if we're working on, like if we're doing speed work, we'll go real light and have somebody do like speed reps. If we're going in a max strength phase, we'll really load it, and we may only have them do 3 to 5 reps. So we basically will treat it as, as anything else, squatting or deadlifting, and we just mirror it so that it matches the phase that we're in. So if we're getting into the off season now, we'll go into a bit of a hypertrophy phase. In North Carolina, it's kind of, quote unquote off season. Not as bad as off season as from the Northeast where I'm from, but then as you get closer to the season, you're going to go faster and heavier, and you kind of periodize it that way.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I want to move on now to some of the stuff you've done here. And I find the correlations you found between some of the tests that you use, the vertical jump test, seated chest pass, the shot put, and the Kaiser rotation, the correlations between those tests and club head speed to be really interesting and to give us some really good insight as to, some things we should be working on in the gym. So maybe can you dive into that data a little bit now?
Yeah, for sure. So I think our initial data that when we were looking at the data sets is probably coming up to 2020. Those were kind of the big 4 that we saw. We didn't have a big enough database to statistically be able to draw causational relationships, but we were starting to see some strong correlations, right? So, and everyone listening doesn't know what that means. Correlation means that if one goes up, the other, we typically are seeing that go up too. Causational means, hey, if you want A to go up, you need to increase B because B makes A go up, right? So we didn't have enough sample size up, to 2020 where, I think we were only at probably 2,000 or 3,000 people at that point. And it wasn't just the numbers weren't showing. So the correlation, so we were really kind of focused on, like what you said, the shot put, the big 3 from a power standpoint were shot put, seated chest pass, and vertical leap. And this was before we had force plates. So we were just looking at raw number, how high somebody could jump. And then we would also look at the Kaiser. So this was our attempt to, can you somehow, everyone's looking at hey, rotation's important. Can you somehow measure it? And so we did this test where we made it up where you laid on your back, flat on your back. We used the pneumatic air pressure. You hold your arms straight up, interlocked. And we had the handle via a string to a wood stick into a water bottle, so that if the person fell, the water bottle would full. And that's how we standardized the inter and intra-rater reliability of it. And so that was probably, I think it was like a 0.6 R value for correlation. So it was actually pretty high.
Yeah.
But then
over 0.5 is pretty good.
Yeah. So that was the lowest one. The others were all like 0.8, close to 0.9. So we took all of that data, and then we kept collecting, and then we got to the, probably end of 2020 into 21. And we were able to actually look at these and run some more complex. We got smarter and figured out how to run all these other statistical tests and stuff. So that's what we found. Our biggest limitations is our smarts and lack thereof. But that's where we got to the point where then we actually looking at the statistical comparisons and the interrelationships and all that, that the anti-rotation test and the shot put actually, while they were correlatory, they were not causatory. So meaning like if you didn't get better at the chest pass or the vertical, you probably weren't going to get better at the shot put. So they were kind of if you think of the shot put test, if you break it down, it's a push movement with one arm and a lot of lower leg vertical explosion. So it would make sense. So vertical and upper body push power kind of combine into the chest pass. So what we found as we've gotten more and more data is the testing we do gets a lot cleaner. It becomes a lot quicker. And so that's where we've, at this point, the causationally, the seated chest pass and the vertical leap are the two big ones. In particular, on the vertical leap, it's looking at, not just how high you jump, but how much force you produce, which we can do that obviously now very accurately with force plates. But then also, for example, if you have a 200-pound guy and a 100-pound person, they both jump 12 inches. The 200-pound guy had to put more force into the ground to get to that 12 inches than the 100-pound person. So mass does matter. So, but those are definitely the two that we've seen at this point that actually that have a causational impact on club head speed.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the causational because, obviously, when you look at the correlations, that kind of confirms that we should be looking at vertical power, horizontal push power, and then the rotational push powers in there as well. And then you can kind of reverse engineer those tests a little bit and come up with some exercises and some programming that's going to enhance the athlete's ability to perform well on those tests. But it's an interesting thing about kind of getting fixated on the tests, and it's a little bit different because you have found some causation there with the vertical jump and the push. But I'll tell you a quick story here. When I first started working in the field, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of really elite hockey players and some NHL guys and some of the best 16, 17, and 18-year-olds in the world who are getting ready to transition into the NHL. And at 18, they have to go through the NHL combine, right? And so there's this battery of tests, just like the NFL combine, battery of tests that they have to go through. And how well they perform on these tests can impact where they get selected in the draft, right? And so we know what the tests are. And so we would practice the tests. And, some of the guys we got at 14, and we would start practicing these tests specifically, not even just to enhance the athleticism necessarily, but just to get them really, really good at these tests so that they could perform well during the combine and, hopefully get drafted higher. But when we did that, when we set time aside to practice the tests, we knew that we weren't necessarily enhancing their hockey performance when we're doing that, right? We're not necessarily making them better hockey players. We're just making them really, really good at this test. And so my point is there's a fine line between just practicing a test. Now for you found some causation between the vertical jump and that push. And so that should be part of, if somebody's looking, if they have the ability and, don't have any injuries and things like that, that should be in people's programs if they're looking to increase club head speed. But there should also be attention paid to a properly designed program that's just going to enhance the athlete's ability to jump higher rather than just practicing the jump higher. I think sometimes people just get fixated, for the listeners, okay, I just have to jump and jump and jump and I'm going to hit the ball farther. It doesn't really work necessarily like that.
I think my favorite example, Thomas, is we had when we were doing the shot put, we had an older gentleman. He's been a member here. Oh shoot, I don't know, he's been here 8 years now. I think he's probably 4 years in. And he's literally every day after class, he's grabbing a med ball and he is shot putting in the gym, right? Like you just knew the end of class, Dennis was shot putting. And then when we found out that it didn't have a causational relationship to club head speed, it was kind of like, nose goes, I'm not telling Dennis that doesn't work. I'm not doing it. But he was so fixated on I got a shot put. The better I get my shot put up, right? And to your point, particularly in golf, this is where I always find it comical when on social media or whatever, when a tour player wins and everybody's like, oh, well, it must have been the trainer. Like we don't have any impact on that. Like our job on the physical side is I can make you swing the club faster. I can make sure you have the mobility to get from point A to point B, and I can do my best to keep you from getting overuse injuries. Other than that, like, I'm just giving you a toolbox. It's on you and your swing coach. And like, you have to be the one that actually, the athlete has to be the one that puts it together. And to your point, like with the hockey players, obviously there's some financial gain if you perform better on those tests. You get drafted, right? That makes sense. I think in golf we have this idea of like, hey, if my club head speed goes up 3 miles an hour, I'm going to drop 2 strokes. Like, well, yeah, it depends. And so it's just an important thing. And like, yes, we know that if you can improve your lower body push power, you can swing the club faster. We know that if you increase your upper body push power, you can swing the club faster. Does that mean you're going to go from a 10 handicap to scratch? No, but it doesn't hurt.
It's funny because we had Colton Ost on, and he talked about, he got really fixed because, he's so accurate, right? Both in his driving and his putting. And so he really got fixated on like, man, if I could get like another 30 yards, what would that do? And I think it was somebody from Tyler's took him out. He's like, well, let's go see. So like hit one ball and then play that ball and then drop another ball, 30 yards ahead and see how you do. And he actually scored better with the shorter ball, without the distance. And so it kind of highlights, just like you say, I mean, there's a lot more to getting around the golf course than hitting the ball far. But yeah, a lot of people do get fixated on that. And so when you do see that data and you see the correlation between, and then you see the causation with the vertical jump or rate of force development and the push, how does that influence your decisions in terms of exercise selection and program design? If somebody's like, hey, I want to increase club head speed, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I've heard that a few times. I think the first place we always start is, you mentioned it before, is how do you do it safely, right? And how do you do it so that, our goal at Par for Success is to be the best in the world at giving people longevity in the game of golf. And for some people that may mean speed. I will tell you that 85% of people over 50 don't have full rotational mobility in one of the 4 main rotational centers. So if that is the case, like, I don't care about your speed right now. What I care about is, can I get your shoulders and your hips and your thoracic spine and your neck? Can we get them to the point where you are functionally able to rotate safely through those joints? Then we can look at what's your current club head speed related to what's your current power output. Because particularly if you're listening to this and you're a single digit handicap, more than likely what we see is you're what we call a ticking time. We've kind of categorized golfers in 3 categories. You're a ticking time bomb, and that either A, you don't have the rotational mobility and you're trying to swing fast, or B, let's say you're one of the unicorns over 50 who do have that without, just by happenstance. Then we look at, well, hey, you're already swinging the 75th percentile for your age group, because we have that data now, but your power output's like literally in the 20th percentile. So if there's a big gap between where your current club head speed is and where your strength and power abilities are, assuming that you have the mobility, well, I'm still not giving you overspeed training, or like, we're not going to chase speed. What we're going to chase is closing that gap, because closing that gap is going to decrease your injury risk. It's going to increase the likelihood you're going to be able to play this game for a lot of years. Oh, and by the way, there's icing on the cake where your club head speed probably is going to go up too. Right. And then if we get to where you're pretty balanced, or even, you get the random, usually younger guys who are crazy powerful and flexible, but they swing the club like they're, 90. Then at that point, then some transfer training or some overspeed training can be like 25 miles an hour like that. I've seen that too. But it's really, it's understanding everyone listening is not a nail. We don't need to bring a hammer to every single person out there listening. We have to assess and see, what are you? What are your needs? Understanding your goals, and then, work together to put that program together to help you get where you need to go safely, so that it's sustainable speed. Anybody, I could get a monkey can train you to gain speed. Just move it faster, right? Like, literally most golfers, if you just take your driver, swing it really fast 30 times, 3 times a week, I guarantee you gain some speed. The art and the science, and what I believe is the most important thing and the most under messaged kind of message, is that it's not speed that you want, it's sustainable speed that you want. How can you sustain that as you age? That's by being able to do it safely and understanding your body and where your limitations are, and helping you augment your strengths, but also filling in those holes and gaps that you may have.
Yeah. It's amazing too, how much people can improve their speed. So when somebody comes to me, like most of the people who reach out to me, it's because their shoulder hurts or their back hurts or something hurts. And then, so we fix that issue. And it's amazing to me when I first started working with golfers is like, well, you just fix the shoulder a little bit. How much impact, or like, man, my club head speed's gone up like 10%, and I'm hitting the ball like 30 yards farther. And we haven't done anything we're just trying to make your shoulder feel better. But so because your shoulder does feel better and you move it better and your hand path is now longer and you're more consistent in your path, you're hitting the ball better. And so, yeah, I 100% agree is to address those mobility issues and deal with the injuries, the nagging stuff that, you're trying to ignore. If you just deal with that, quite often your performance goes through the roof.
100%. And I don't think that gets shared and hammered in enough to people because it's not sexy, right? Oh, fix my shoulder. That's what I got to do, right? It's way more sexy to like, hey, I swung this implement and I gained 20 miles an hour in, 2 weeks. Like, okay, well, I can tell you after looking at, thousands and thousands of people, I've literally had one guy that came in and he was an Division I basketball player, 6'8". He had mobility like a gymnast. He could jump 40 inches. He could throw the med ball like 40 something feet. And he swung 100 miles an hour. He was 32 at the time, right? I gave him some overspeed training and 5 minutes later, he was 125. That's the one human being in which like there's a silver bullet like that. The majority of us listening right now are more to what you were speaking of. There's something there's you're damaged goods a little bit. You've had a life of sports and injuries, and you're not moving the way that you need to move to optimize, your golf swing and for you to swing as fast as you can safely. And while it's not as sexy, it's predictable, I guess. And to me, that's the exciting part is it's so predictable. We have, a lot of the data and the research. It's which one, where do you fit? What do we know works based on what we're seeing? And let's just go do what we ask you to do, and you're going to be there.
And, that's interesting. And so let's focus in a little bit more now on the power training itself.
Yeah.
Let's assume that the person doesn't have any injuries, which I don't think I've ever had anybody reach out to me with injuries, but let's just say
it's fun to live in unicorn world, Thomas. Let's do it.
But let's just say, they don't have any injuries. I should say I have, like, when people don't often reach out to me and say, hey, Thomas, I want to increase my club head speed. That's rarely why they reach out to me. They usually have a problem that, like I said, an injury. But for the few people that have reached out to me, they generally fall into like one of two categories. Is one, the person who, they've been playing golf a long time. They've never done any strength training. Right. And so, trying to train for power is a funny thing because it's the product of force and velocity, right? Power equals force times velocity. And so if somebody has never done any strength training and then you introduce them to strength training and they can now, increase the value of that force variable in that power equation, they get some really good results in club head speed. But again, it has to be with, somebody who knows what they're doing so that you're not also getting stiffer and, getting wear and tear on your joints. The other person that occasionally reach out to me for club head speed is the person who actually has been strength training. They have a good amount of relative strength, but they've never converted that strength to speed. Right. And I think people who are well trained and they have that good amount of relative strength for golf, they do better for increasing power by focusing more on that velocity variable and doing, speed strength training or absolute speed training. And that kind of brings me to the next thing I want to talk to you about is actually, well, first of all, if somebody reaches out to you and they don't have any injuries and they want to increase power, how do you assess which variable they need, whether the force variable or the velocity variable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think, and I love how this has turned into a philosophical podcast where these people philosophically have no injuries. So I think when we get to this point, let's say, and we're, mobility is good, no injury history, this is where we start to look at, we always look at the big three: squat, bench, and deadlift. What are your strength and experiences in those areas? We look at both absolute and relative strength, absolute being what's the total amount you can move, and then, relative being what is that relative to your body weight. And then we're also going to look at those, the vertical leap. We're going to look at the upper body push power. like one of the cool things that we can see on the force plates, particularly with the lower body, is we can look at, static verticals versus counter movement jumps. So, what's your, how high, what's the difference? There's a elastic utilization ratios, but, fancy word for how much higher do you go when you get to dip down and jump up versus if you got to start, from almost like a quote unquote seated position. So that's where we start getting in more. And that's kind of the exciting part of really diving in and figuring out what is the DNA of this person athletically. It's really interesting. We've seen stuff where we had 10 girls who swing over 100 miles an hour and half of them had back pain. And when you looked at their actual numbers, they all deadlifted, absolute strength was all, they could all deadlift over 200 pounds, but the half that had back pain did not deadlift at least 1.5 times body weight. And so then once the strength goes up, all of a sudden magically back pain goes away. Right. So, but for the other ones, it was like, well, you're relatively strong enough and absolutely you're strong enough. Is there really any more benefit to continuing to get stronger or just kind of stay here and we can focus on other areas? Maybe it's more speed and how quickly you produce the force. Right. And so that definitely is where some of the technology comes in handy, of being able to look at, how quickly does somebody peak on a vertical move, looking at, that's where, we get that person who's both absolutely strong and relatively strong. Velocity-based training can certainly be helpful in those instances. So that's kind of the fun part when you get more into the deep science of it. But for most golfers out there, unfortunately, it's kind of pretty boring. If you got no injuries and you got no mobility, you probably are just weak.
All right. So on that note, let's get into the overspeed training. Speaking of injuries, so the people that do have a good amount of relative strength and
wait, did you say people get hurt doing overspeed training? Really?
I've had a few, yeah, message me. Not
oh yeah, I've never heard of that. That's weird. Yeah.
So let's get into that a little bit now, because that's one of the things that, if somebody has come to me and they're well trained, they have a good amount of strength, and we're trying to convert that strength into speed, we're kind of spending more time on that, the velocity end of that spectrum, working on the speed strength, working on absolute speed. And that's where, medicine ball throws, I do a lot with that. I do a lot of the overload swings, and we do a lot of overspeed swings. Mm-hmm. But we have to be careful with that. And this is where, like, some of the research you've done with this has been so helpful to, I hope everybody in this industry is listening to your research, but it's really helped us at Trainfuly, is to be able to kind of confirm the thought that we had when trying to use overload and overspeed training, because it comes from track and field, and you got to get that force stimulus and you got to get that speed stimulus just right. So I want you to talk about the weight of the club, why that's important, but also the volume and the load on the athletes, because some of the protocols out there are just so excessive with how much they want the people swinging. So maybe get into that research now.
Yeah, so we had a lot of the similar feelings on all that overspeed kind of stuff when it came out, in terms of the volume that people were being pushed to do. And we always use the topic. I was thinking of like a 100-meter sprinter, and do you ever see like do you think like Usain Bolt was doing 100-meter sprints? Like I'm pretty sure that was never in his daily training protocol once, never mind like 2 to 3 times a week, right? But that's basically when overspeed training was kind of coming out and becoming more popular. That's what the protocols were. And so that's where we looked at, hey, this doesn't make any sense physiologically. And we had I wrote a whole report, and I went through all the research of different sports, of baseball. I went from baseball to cricket to like everywhere, right? And nowhere was there anyone who was doing that much volume of swings. And so that's, then we said, well, let's design a study and let's take a look. What if we cut it, and down cut it down 66%? What if we only did like 30 swings? Let's see what happens, because there was no published research on overspeed training, on protocols or anything like that. There were a couple of silos of people who claimed to have stuff that they wouldn't share. So we went and we looked at it, and lo and behold, you can do 30 swings and get the same amount of output in terms of gains as when you do 100 swings. Thankfully, I don't think anybody's given us any credit, but a lot of the a lot of the protocols have come down, which is nice. And that's good for, just to share the information that golfers are getting some of the better information. I still wish people would, share a simple 4 rotational center screen with people. We do it for free for anyone, but if you do have the ability to rotate, you definitely don't need to be swinging hundreds and hundreds of times. We're currently doing, off the come out again when this study's done, we're looking at non-dominant size swings. And I can't say it looks really good at this point. But I think that's where we're just continually trying to ask why and say, well, let's prove to see if it works or not. And I think that's the cool things with overspeed is you literally can swing 30 times instead of 100. You can do it twice a week. And as long as you're doing it the right way, you can see some pretty cool results. If it's done the right way with the right person at the right time.
So then let's get into the weight of the club now, because just for the listeners, like when overspeed training is done, say with track and field, and actually we talked about this with Sasha McKenzie, but just for the people who maybe didn't hear the episode, if you're doing overload training, the person is in track and field, they're towing a sled, and the weight of the sled is not just some standard weight. It's determined by how much the runner slows down when they tow the sled. They generally don't want the sprinter to slow down by more than 10% when they're towing the sled. And then the same with the overspeed. Now they're getting actually towed, like they have an elastic band or a machine tow them when they're doing the overspeed training in track and field. We don't have that in golf. But my point is that with the overspeed training, they don't want to get faster by more than 10%. They kind of want to stay in this Goldilocks zone to get that stimulus just right. So then what did you find? Because you actually looked at that to see what the different clubs did to the golfer's speed. And what did you find?
Yeah, so when we looked at it, so we used the super speed stick. So I believe the heavy stick is the light stick is like 20% lighter. The blue stick's about 5% lighter than a standard driver. And the red stick, I think, was 5 or 10% heavier. We actually had measured out the grams. They were not consistent all the time, but generally that's where it came to. And basically what we found is if somebody's swinging an implement that's too light, so like that super light club, kinematically, so we looked at it, we did everything tested on K-Vest and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, the upper body just runs wild. It's like the totally wrong sequence. Your hands move fast, but it's totally wrong sequence. And we had a group that only utilized just the light stick and they got slower. And then we had a group that used the heavier stick. And when you use that, and we were talking before we jumped on here recording, like it actually increases X factors pretty significantly where you see a lot more separation. Unfortunately, it was the heavier stick. We had another group who only did the heavy stick and they got slower as well too. The groups who used the middle stick, or that like 5% lighter, so it's very close to the actual weight of the implement, they got faster, as did the group who did all 3 sticks. But statistically speaking, there was no difference if you just used one versus all 3. We then did a follow-up study where we took out the light and the heavy. So we only we basically just wanted more numbers to increase sample size. And we re-looked at just the 5% lighter stick versus all 3. And again, there's statistically no difference in club head speed gains, between the 2 groups. We've continued that was 2019. So probably the last 2 years, we've been continuing in-house. And I will say when sticks break, we don't tend to replace them. So we really are kind of just having people, you can use your driver pretty much. If you really want something 5%, you can go to like a 5 wood is typically pretty close to the driver. And particularly now that we have force plates, we're able to look at, kinetic outputs as well as how, impacts and kinematics and the actual launch monitor and speeds. There's no big difference that we see, but so you can do a lot less volume, like 66% less volume. So you can do 30 swings and you can really just use your driver or something just a little bit lighter, and you're going to get pretty solid results.
And that's what Dan Kogelman, the head of strength and conditioning on the European tour, the DP tour now, I guess. Yeah. That's what he said too. He said recommended treating it like 5 sets of 5 with either your driver or your 5 wood, and do that twice a week. And they get really good results with that. And he said even just use the ball as well and learn about the dispersion that you have with that speed.
Yeah, so that's the other issue when you use sticks too, right? Is the aerodynamics of it, and I can't tell you people that are like, oh, I got the stick up to 130, and you're like, cool, what's your driver doing? Still the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there's definitely a difference between dry swings and actually hitting a golf ball as well.
This has been awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on. For the people listening, where can they find you, and tell us about your facility? And you guys do online stuff now too, is that right?
Yeah, we do. So, basically like the best place to find us would be, obviously our website, par4success, PAR 4success.com. And we actually set up a page private for any of your listeners. So it's par4success.com/trainfuly. They can go there. They can, the 4 rotational tests, they can take that so they can see if they should be doing overspeed training or not. But they can grab that there. We do a ton of online stuff at this point. We've got people pretty much in every continent where people play golf. But I think the big thing of how we look at approaching that and working with people, we do it all. It's all custom. We do it all one-on-one. It's all based on science, and that's, I think, that the reason why we've been successful virtually is because we take the data and we collect it and we say, hey, this is where you're starting. We're going to implement, program A that we decide is, we put together for you based on what you got and the amount of time you got and what you need. And then we're going to retest in 2 weeks and we're going to see how's it getting. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? There's no guessing. It's, it's very much that got better. Okay, let's adjust here. That needs more work. Let's adjust there. Right. So yeah, so, if anyone wants to check us out, par4success.com/trainfuly, you guys can grab, the free assessment. On social, YouTube, we do a ton of educational stuff. We release a new video every single week on different topics and diving into a lot of this. So we share a lot of the new findings that we have. That's just all the handles just at par4success. So very easy to find us kind of anywhere.
Well, awesome. And I appreciate all the work you guys do, all the evidence-based research you do. It's been a big impact on how I approach a lot of my programming. And I know a lot of people in the industry appreciate it as well. So thank you for your research, Chris, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Thomas. We'll have to come back on when we get within the new year. We'll have a ton of new ground reaction force stuff and the non-dominant side training. We got a lot of stuff coming in the pipeline, so it'll be fun to share with your listeners.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. All right. Thanks, buddy.
For sure.